Welcome back to Overhaul Overland. It's so important to check a vehicle thoroughly before you buy it. And as you've seen, the check we did with Snyman 4x4, we picked up a lot of points. Equally, the drivetrain is another critical component, and the best way to test that is to actually drive the vehicle, and more importantly to use a specialist who actually can identify and pick up the problems when they test the vehicle. I've chosen to work with Alaric from Cape Transmissions. I trust his work. He's got 30 years of really good experience, and he's going to take the vehicle and drive it with me to understand what he can pick up from his experience. He's got a number of tests that he does while he's driving to just see what it shows up. Based on that, we're going to make a decision whether we buy this vehicle or whether we walk away from it. So basically, the idea is for us to just check the vehicle. People are going to go and buy a vehicle who are going to get a chance to drive it and need to understand what would you look for when you're driving a vehicle? What would you actually try and pick up in the time you test drive a car before you actually go and pay for it? And that's really related to the gearbox and the four-wheel drive working mechanism.
Drivetrain, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, generally, the first place to start, I would say, is the clutch. Most rear-wheel drive gearboxes are not synchronized on the reverse. So if you were to at all engage reverse and you get a crunching sound or a grating sound, that means the clutch didn't disengage properly. Your gearbox is still turning while you're trying to select a gear. So dead giveaways for faulty clutches would be generally grating into reverse or struggling to go into first gear, stiff action into first gear. That could is a telltale sign of a bad clutch.
Clutch worn, yeah.
Of course, the general feel of the clutch, the stiffness of the clutch. Is it stiff? Is it soft? Some modified clutches are heavier on the foot, which is normal. Also, the take-up point of your clutch shouldn't be too near the floor.
Yeah.
So that's another telltale sign of a bad clutch.
Or too high up.
Too high up is a thin plate.
Yeah.
Too low is a pressure plate that's not working properly.
Okay.
So, all signs of clutch. The first thing to check. And then, of course, as you pull away, shutters and whatnot.
Okay. As you're releasing your foot off the clutch.
Yes, especially at lower RPM. Sometimes you can compensate for a shudder by increasing the engine RPM a bit. But if you pull off an idle on diesels especially, if you have a poor shudder, it can be clutch. It can be other things as well, like mountings.
Okay.
Center bearings on prop shafts. Okay, here we go. Immediately I pick up a little bit of a whine on this one in first gear.
Okay. And that would be coming from
the gearbox.
Gearbox itself.
And there, it's there in second gear as well. Okay. But considering we have 441,000 kilometers, it's
not bad.
Fairly normal, yes. And it's also not something that will break. It's just an annoying sound.
And I think that's the thing. People often get scared of vehicles with high mileage. And I think if you've done your checks properly and you understand the parameters of what you're working in, that it's actually sometimes a worthwhile, acceptable risk to actually buy the car and say, you know what, I can work with this.
Yes. Some things, I tell people there's a difference between a noise and a sound. This is acceptable, with this I'll go to Egypt and back. It will never break.
Right. And typically the sounds that you'd be concerned about would be sort of what?
Harsher sounds. Grinding, rumbling sounds are far more severe than a light whine. I'm not sure if our mics will pick up this whine, but if we increase speed a bit, we'll probably find it to be quiet in fourth gear. Then the gearbox has a direct drive straight through the gearbox. It doesn't go through the lay shaft.
Yeah.
And the whine we have here is between the input shaft and the cluster gear.
Okay.
If it's quiet in fourth, then we can just confirm that. Second rewinding. One should also grating, when you're shifting gears and the gears grate, or you feel a restriction, especially gearing down, it can be clutch related, but also if your synchros are worn, you'll get a grate. As you, there we light wine in third, the road noise is sort of. I think we're quiet in
You're quieter, definitely quieter, yeah.
Yes. So that would be an input shaft and cluster gear wine for the mileage acceptable. So far the gear shift, no issues, even gearing down, no issues.
So your synchro challenges, you know, with synchros are your wearing items on changing up and down through the gears, allowing you to change. That's going to highlight changing down or jumping out of the gear.
More so than gearing up, yes.
Right, okay, so you're changing down and you're struggling to change down, intimating a worn synchro.
Yes.
Okay.
If you have a funny rattling, very, very high frequency rattling sound, almost like an engine pinging, old engines with incorrect timing.
Yes.
Clutch plate springs can wear out and it gives you sort of a resonance, a funny rattling sound against engine compression coming down the hill like we did. Or if you labor the vehicle a bit, I'll demonstrate now. If you maybe shift to third gear a bit sooner than you usually would, and you accelerate, you could get a harshness through the vehicle, also caused by old clutch, worn
the clutch springs worn out.
Yes, they're simply being loose or being too soft. But what I want to check now on an open stretch is sometimes on full-time 4x4s, you get a bit of a backlash from the center diff in the transfer case. This model has a planetary gear, so it doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
But on the Land Cruisers with ordinary silent spider gears, you do get it. So what we'll do is we'll just get to a decent speed, and then we will just abruptly let go of the accelerator and accelerate again. On this vehicle it's perfectly smooth. There's no serious goof sounds, banging sounds. So I'm happy with that.
And that's it's a good indicator of that wear pickup in the driveline.
Your whole driveline for that matter.
Exactly.
Prop shaft, universal
diffs,
joints, midship assemblies on the prop shaft, in this case, your CV joints on your front shafts where they go through the wheel members, the splines, all of that you can pick up by that simple test. Now I'd like to get into fifth gear. These particular gearboxes do have a bit of an issue with the fifth gear becoming loose on its splines.
Okay. And how are you going to know that that's happening?
Same test we just did. A bit more of a doof there.
Okay.
And out of experience, more than often, they are all loose.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. So it's one of the Achilles heels on this particular gearbox.
And that's
some of the cruiser boxes too.
Yes.
Also
on your old 75 cast iron boxes.
Yep.
Terrain Tamer has a fix for that with the much wider transfer input gear, much longer splines.
Yep.
Larger surface area to carry the load. As with their fifth gear upgrade for this one, there's a full complement of splines in the gear instead of the 3 sets staggered 120 degrees apart.
Right.
So it can, I'd say about carry double the load.
So, those sort of strong fixes have obviously come in over time.
Yes.
And once you've rebuilt the box, almost putting it back to brand new.
Yes. And actually better. Theoretically should last longer.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is, you heard that when I went into fifth gear.
Yes.
I can almost guarantee you. See, compared to fourth gear, just there.
It's much less.
Much less,
gear.
yes.
In fact, noticeably different.
Yes.
Okay.
So, we're almost certain to see that once we open it up.
Right.
The reason for that is modern diesel engines have so much torque. You shift to fifth gear and according to the driver, you're easily driving along. In the meantime, you're straining the overdrive, the fifth gear, badly. Yeah. And in time it just wears out more and more and more. And not much of an indication of it as you're going along until one day it completely strips.
Yes, yeah.
Then you know you've worn it out.
Would you say it's a lot of education about how you can look after your car, and especially when you build an overland vehicle with a lot more weight on it?
Yes.
You're putting a lot more strain through the drivetrain.
Yes.
And I go to a lot of dips to teach people how to change gears, getting your foot off that clutch before you hit the power.
Yes.
Feed the power in after the foot's off, so you've got the full engagement of the clutch, the full bite, and gently. You don't want to put a shock load through your drivetrain.
Yes. General driving, like we're doing now, for sure, but especially off-road and obstacle driving, people tend to ride the clutch. You know,
Yes.
release the pedal, let it be completely engaged, and then do your driving. But people love driving a car with a clutch. And rear-wheel drive vehicles like these, your fifth gear is always in overdrive. It means your output shaft, your prop shaft wants to turn faster than your engine's crank. And physics, you know, you don't get anything for free in nature. So something's paying the price. That's why I'd recommend fifth gear. Overland vehicles are all going to be heavy.
Yeah.
Maintain your momentum in fifth gear. If you ever feel the need to accelerate in fifth gear to go up a hill or overtake something, it's not advisable.
Drop it back to fourth and use the direct drive through the gearbox.
Yes, try and achieve your speed in the fourth gear, and then maintain your speed, or gently accelerate in fifth gear. But as soon as you feel you need to put foot in fifth, it's like wringing water out of a wet towel.
Yeah, you definitely. I mean, as you say.
Because I've had vehicles with over 400,000 k's with brand new, undamaged fifth gears, and it's people that consciously, you know, take care of their fifth gear.
And I think that's the thing. Most people don't understand the strain you're putting on the transmission.
Yes.
And actually, if you learnt and you put that habit into practice, you wouldn't have that expense down the road.
Use the gears.
You know, and that's important.
Yes.
You know?
I often compare it to cycling. When you go up the hill and your legs burn, shift down a gear.
Yeah.
And your legs will recover. You're going a bit slower, but your legs aren't taking such a big knock. But now with a car, you simply just step on the accelerator. Your legs aren't burning, but you're straining the engine like you would your legs.
Yeah.
Gear down, give the engine a break, give the gear train, the drivetrain, everything a break. Use your gears.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. Very good.
Yes, engines can be revved. They can handle it much better than fifth gears labouring.
Yeah. And that's an expensive repair down the road, you know?
Yes, indeed. And it's even more fuel efficient if you use your RPM rather than labour your engine.
Yeah, true. And then when you talk about maintaining your driveline, you know, with oils and frequency of changing oils, because like we change our engine oil often.
Yes.
You know, I don't know that people change their transmission oils often enough.
Unfortunately, I'd go as far to say that even agencies do not do what they're supposed to at the right service interval. It's like they just top it up, check it, skip it.
Yeah.
But every 60,000 kilometers, I think, is a good rule of thumb for gearboxes and diffs.
Yeah. And what about if you're overlanding, and of course if you're going through any water or anything like that, that's your real concern?
Definitely.
Picking up water. And I know on the 80 series Land Cruiser, the solid axles in the front, often you get the contamination of the CV grease into the diff oil.
Yes.
And I would always say to the people to just check the front diff oil at a service. If it's still clear, don't change it. But if it's contaminated with CV joint grease, drain it, put new oil in.
Yes, sometimes your CV joint greases will have maybe some graphite in it, which can be abrasive.
It takes off that case hardening on the diffs.
on the ring and pinion.
Crown wheel, yeah.
Also, there are all sorts of breather extension kits available, which work very well. But the pressure difference between the inside of a warm diff and the outside of the atmosphere and the cold water, sometimes somebody sucks the water in right through the oil seals. And the oil seal is sort of a directional thing, you know, to keep the oil in, but not really stopping the water ingress from the outside into the diff.
Yeah.
If you look at the design of an oil seal lip.
Yeah, true.
So I'd say after every water crossing, as soon as you get back to civilization, drain your oil, check the condition of it. If it's clear, put it back. If it's contaminated, change it. You will extend the life of your vehicle a lot.
And bearings as well. You know, bearings don't get repacked often enough.
Yes.
And by the time you've taken the dirt that's been sucked in past the seal with the mud, and now that's eaten away at the actual area where the diff seal run or the oil seal runs.
Yes. Yeah, if you're a city driver, I suppose you could wait till the bearing gives some signs, you know, noise or whatever, and have it looked at. But overlanding, recreational 4x4, challenge driving, all that, Water is not a good thing. It's very exciting to do the river crossing, but just remember on Monday when you get back to, drain it and check it.
It's maintenance. It's when people have gone across through the rivers, or they've driven on a big trip, or they're about to go on a big trip. That preparation and the checks just before you go on the trip. Check the bearings, check the oils, and the quality of oils. Talk to me a bit about the quality of oils, because I think that's always a big misnomer about which oil's the best and what oil do you put in. And it does vary with how cold it is. Obviously, I mean, I've run vehicles in Siberia at minus 60 degrees, and using a very different oil to here.
Yes, indeed.
But generally, the oils that we're using.
We have good oils. I can only speak for South Africa. I'm not sure the rest of the world, but we're blessed with a lot of good oil.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any inferior oil. Put it this way, I've never encountered an oil that caused a failure.
Right. Okay.
You might have some performance issues, especially in gearboxes with the ease of shifting.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of an audible sound and this and that. But a mistake I see often with regards to diffs. Some manufacturers will specify a 80W90 oil for the diff, but you do get an 80W90 oil for a gearbox, and you get an 80W90 oil for a diff. The one is for a hypoid gear, and the one is for a helical gear. It's completely different. If you put a helical gear oil in a hypoid diff, you will destroy the diff in a couple of thousand Ks.
Right.
And that's a mistake people make so often. We've just the other day was a V8 diesel Land Cruiser. Somebody did some work on it. The customer then came to me for a second opinion with a notchy shift. He couldn't shift fast enough to get up an obstacle or over an obstacle, and we simply changed the oil to something special. And he was kind enough to phone me with some feedback and said, "Don't know what I did, but it's a completely different vehicle." So with regards to gear shifting, that's a science on its own. There are so many different oils for different vehicles.
Right, yeah.
Some oils work well in some vehicles and not as well in others. But the main thing to look at is not to put a gearbox oil in your diff. Be sure that you have diff oil in your diff and gearbox oil in your gearbox, and nothing will go wrong, nothing will fail.
Yeah.
But the performance of it can be greatly affected by the exact correct oil.
Right, yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And I think that's the thing. People don't always understand. It's very important for them to, when you're buying oil, to make sure you are buying the right oil and the right specification. So note down what is the spec and what do you ask for. So take responsibility for the oil that you're having put in your vehicle, especially if it's not your normal workshop that you're normally used to working with. And that's the important part.
Yes. Your owner's manual will, for instance, for this one, say 75W90. You get 40 different types at any store.
Yeah.
None of them will cause any damage, but some of them will greatly improve the quality of your shift. Some of them will run cooler.
Yeah.
So yes, it's something worthwhile researching.
Yeah.
Ask around.
And more specific to where you're driving climate-wise.
Yes.
And then also more specific to the oils and the environment, what you're taking, how you're loading the vehicle, because it must make a difference on how heavy the vehicle is and how you're loading it.
Yes, heavy loads, we like to recommend the 85W140 for diffs instead of the 1890s for our local temperature and the extra load. But yeah, definitely do your research, make sure you have the right oil in your vehicle. If in doubt, phone a transmission company who work with it every day, and they'll be able to tell you, we find on your vehicle this works well better than that.
It's a good way to do it, because people who are fixing something will have the biggest insight into what goes wrong.
Yes.
And I think if anything, that advice is like gold dust.
Myself and Hubert had some gearing down issues on the H150 and 151 boxes, and we managed to remedy that with trial and error, and we found the correct oil to solve that, yes. Right. So oil definitely makes a difference in your shift. Okay, what I want to check now, potential buyers.
To go through.
Just to be sure that the four-wheel drive system, everything is working. We're getting some obstacles, bumps in the road here. We wouldn't want to overload the clutch or labor the engine too much, so we're going to shift it to low range. Then we can just idle along. On this model, the center diff will automatically be locked now. Then I always look for a little bit of a hill.
Okay.
So I can, have the vehicle weight act as a load. In this case, with a chain-driven transfer case, we can hear if the chain is slipping. If it's jumping over the cogs. We can hear if the CV joints are knocking. And this is my usual test track. So it doesn't look as daunting, but it's quite, give it a bit of welly. No noises, no knocks, everything nice.
And you're going right now down through a donga.
We're going through a donga. I'm not going to get it cross-axled because we don't have diff locks on this model.
Sure.
But there we go again, it crawls through. Also, on many vehicles, you have indication on the dash. This one, the light came on to tell us that our center diff is locked. So that's perfect, it works. The center diff lock mechanically works, and the light indicates the same. That's the only light we have on this model.
Yeah.
And there we go back to high range with the center diff unlocked and the light is off. So no chain slipping, no CV joints making any noise on the front wheels.
And normally people would often test CV joints doing a full lock left, full lock right.
Yes.
You'd still do that?
We can do that, but I mean this is a full-time 4x4, so the CVs are always working, and we've been driving.
Yeah, and you would have heard.
We've done 90-degree
turns through the turning that
we would have had. So this vehicle, even though it has 441,000 kilometers on it, it's perfectly smooth. It drives lovely. It's only more my experience of what I've seen over the last 27 years. I expect this fifth gear splines to be worn out. We did hear a bit of backlash on it on our test drive. But generally speaking, mileage considering, this is a beautiful buy, this one.
Yeah. And I think that's the main thing, and thank you for that, because
yes.
the value in understanding what you're buying, because it's an expensive repair on a transmission. An engine is another expensive repair, and we're going to go through how we would check and test that. But I think it's about instilling confidence. Some of these older vehicles have great value, and this particular model of vehicle is not overpriced for what you're getting as a four-wheel drive.
Yes.
You can pick them up for a very good value. As long as you check out the important parts, you're going to
yes.
come away with a vehicle you can use for a long time before you maybe have to spend some money on it or want to improve it.
Definitely.
Anything going on
yes.
big overland trips, we build back in that reliability, and that's when you've rebuilt all the gearboxes we've done. But we would take the gearbox out and we'd have it stripped down and the transfer box stripped down, more often than not as a precaution, yes. and then for you to put new seals and gaskets in.
Yes, wearable items, bearings, synchros,
yeah.
seals, gaskets, those are the things. So one final test I'd recommend to check driveline is pull the handbrake up nice and tightly. You can even keep your foot on the foot brake as well. And then you will alternate between reverse and first gear. Just suddenly release the clutch up to the take-up point. And then first gear. There you will listen for any excessive backlashes. You'll get clunks and bangs, but this is perfectly normal.
This is just taking up.
It's just taking up the slack of the center diff, the little bits of play in the front diff, the rear diff, the CV joints.
It'd be a lot louder if you heard that.
Yes,
between that.
Yes, on some vehicles are quite prone to them. I'm not going to mention the specific models, but when you change gears, as you release the clutch and accelerate again, you get clunking sounds and doofs. Yeah. It can be an accumulation of little bits of wear on
along
5
or
6 different components, ending up in this one big clunking and doofing. But it's not necessarily an issue. It's just signs of wear.
And sometimes you can drive a vehicle sympathetically with that wear and tear.
Yes, you learn to drive around it by just releasing
gently.
your clutch gentler and accelerating more gently.
Yes. Well, we've just come out of testing the vehicle on the drivetrain with Alaric, and it's so insightful for what we've learned and what we've heard from an expert with 30 years experience. Now, the next check that we're going to do on the vehicle is to take it to a dyno tuning testing center, Goch & Cooper. They're specialists in the field, they're specialist engine rebuilders, steeped in experience, and these guys are going to put the vehicle on a dyno for us really to see what sort of power have we got on this engine. So the reason we're going to do a dyno test is because in episode 2, when we did our compression test on the engine, we found they were all over the place. They were not consistent through the 4 cylinders. So that brings about a question: how much power is this engine really giving out compared to its standard specification? The only way we're going to find that is to put it on a rolling road, set up with a dyno to read out the power outputs and look for any other problems on the engine while it's under load on the dyno. So thank you for all your comments and your contribution. We've really enjoyed sharing the whole process with you, connecting with specialists to get their input, their insights and their knowledge. So please like and subscribe, and don't forget to go to our website for more information.